The morning after they buried Everett Vance, his second wife set a brass key on the kitchen table and slid it across to his son. One key, nothing else. She kept the house. She kept the truck. She kept the savings and the warm beds and every stick of furniture inside those walls. And to a 19-year-old boy she'd lived under the same roof with for 7 years, she gave a key to the old tool barn out back. "There's nothing in there but rust and your father's wasted years," she told him. "Take it and go." Thad Vance didn't argue. He never did. He put $11 in his pocket, a duffel bag, over his shoulder, and he called his father's old hound down off the porch, a gray-muzzled dog gone stone-deaf 2 winters back, who couldn't hear a word of it and came anyway. The whole town had spent 30 years calling Everett Vance a tinkerer, who never made a dime. A quiet man, who hid in a barn, while his family did without. So Thad walked out across a yard hard with frost. He put the key in a padlock he hadn't been allowed to touch since he was 12 years old. And he lifted the lantern, what his father had been building behind that door quietly for 7 years in the hours after everyone else was asleep. Nobody in that town ever saw coming. But that's the end of the beginning. To understand why a boy would take a key like that and say nothing, to understand what was waiting behind that padlock, you have to go back 2 days. To a Tuesday. To a room above a hardware store, where a radiator clanked and a tired man kept taking his glasses off and putting them back on. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. Rowena Vance sat with her back very straight. 53 years old. Dark coat buttoned to the throat. Hands folded in her lap like a woman at church. Her son Josiah slouched beside her. 17. Picking at the cuff of a borrowed black jacket he'd already outgrown in the shoulders. Thad sat 1 chair apart from both of them, which was about right. He had big hands and a flat carpenter's pencil tucked behind his right ear. He'd put it there that morning without thinking. Same as his father had every day for 40 years. He hadn't noticed until he was already in the truck bed, and by then it seemed like bad luck to take it out. The lawyer's name was Prosper Halstead. He'd been practicing in that town since before Thad was born. He read the small things first, and he read them slow because he'd been at this long enough to know that the slow parts are a mercy. The truck. To Rowena. The savings account, what little was in it. To Rowena. The house and the land it stood on. All of it. Hers. Then he came to the last part, and he slowed down like a man stepping onto ice he already knows is thin. To my son Thaddeus, Halstead read. I leave the workshop building, the half-acre it stands on, and everything inside it. He stopped. He looked over the glasses at Thad. There's a line here he wanted read out loud. Says he'll know what to do with it. The radiator clanked. Nobody said anything. Then Rowena let out a breath through her nose. Half a laugh. Not quite. That's it, she said. It wasn't a question. That's the relevant portion, Halstead said. Yes. So he gets the junk. Flat. Almost pleasant. 30 years of that man hiding in a barn. And the junk is what he leaves the boy. It's his, Halstead said carefully. The building. The parcel. The contents. That's clear. Josiah shifted in his chair. He glanced at Thad, then at the floor, and stayed there. Halstead took his glasses off, held them in his hand, looked at Thad the way you look at somebody you've decided to say something to, whether or not it's your business. I knew your father a little, he said. He rebuilt the bookcase in my mother's front room. 20 years back, near enough. Thing came apart in a move. 3 shops told her it was firewood. He turned the glasses over. He fixed it in a weekend. Wouldn't take but half what it was worth. He looked like he wanted to say more. Then he looked at Rowena and thought better of it. Anyway, he said, and put the glasses back on. Thad said nothing. He was thinking about the barn and the strange, ordinary truth that he had not set foot inside it since he was 12 years old. Here's the thing nobody in that room knew. For the first 12 years of his life, that barn was the best place on earth. His father would carry him out there on his shoulders, set him up on the high stool, Let him hand over the chisels one at a time in the right order, like a nurse passing instruments. Thad could still feel the weight of a mallet in his small hands. Still smell the cedar coming up warm off a fresh cut. He was 6 the first time his father let him hold a plane. He was 6 when his mother died, too. Those two things sat next to each other in his memory, and he had never once been able to pull them apart. Then Rowena came, and something changed. His father started locking the barn. Not against weather. Not against thieves. Against people. Against him. Stay out of there. Thad was 12. It was the only unkind thing Everett Vance ever said to his son. And he said it once, and it landed like a hand across the face. Then, softer and worse somehow for being softer, "I'm not ready for you to see it yet. When it's time, you'll understand." He never explained. The years went by, and Thad stopped asking, the way you stop pressing on a bruise. Now his father was in the ground, and the bruise was the only thing he owned. They drove home in 2 separate silences. Rowena and Josiah up front, heater going, radio off. Thad in the bed of the truck with the wind. Because there hadn't been an offer to ride up front, and he hadn't asked for one. 19 years old, coat collar up, watching the road unspool backward, and the cold pulled up the only warm thing he had to set against it. He was 7. Winter night not so different from this one. Sitting on the high stool, while his father planed a long board by lantern light. Wood curls coming off the blade in pale ribbons, dropping around Everett's boots like snow, that had decided to fall indoors. "You see how the grain runs," his father said, not looking up, never looking up when he said the important things. "You don't fight it. You find which way it wants to go and you go with it." Thad reached down, picked up a curl, held it to his nose. "Everything in here's like that," Everett said. "People too. Mostly." And Thad, 7 years old, still small enough to swing his boots off the stool, said the thing he'd been carrying around all week. "I'm no good at school." The plane stopped. "The words won't stay still on the page. Teacher says I'm behind the others." Everett set the plane down. He came around the bench and crouched in front of the stool, so that for once he was looking up at his boy instead of down. "Let me tell you a thing," he said, "and I want you to keep it." Thad nodded. "There's people who think with their mouths, and there's people who think with their hands." He tapped his son once on the chest, right over the breastbone. "Not hard. The whole world is built for the mouth people. They get handed everything. But the hand people—" He stopped, made sure the boy was looking at him. "The hand people are the ones who build what the mouth people stand around admiring." Thad didn't understand all of it. He was 7, but his father had told him to keep it, so he kept it. Back in the truck bed, 19 and freezing, Thad Vance closed his eyes. "Kept it, Dad. 12 years and I never once put it down. So where's the part where it starts helping?" She waited until after dark. That was the part Thad thought about later. Not the words. The timing. She waited until it was dark and cold and there was nowhere for a boy to go. He was standing at the counter eating dry cereal out of the box, because she'd started keeping track of what he ate. Not locking things up exactly, just noticing, out loud, the way you notice a stranger boarding in your house, which he supposed he was now. "We need to talk about the arrangement," Rowena said. "There's no arrangement." He kept his eyes on the box. "That's right." She pulled out a chair. Saturday. Folded her hands. "There isn't." Up close she looked tired in a way that went past the funeral. Dark half circles. A tightness at the corners of her mouth he hadn't seen before and didn't know how to read. "This house is mine now," she said. "I have my own son to think about. I can't run a boarding house for a grown man who isn't mine." "I'm Dad's," Thad said. Something moved across her face. Fast. Gone. "Your father is dead," she said. "And he left you a barn. So that's where you'll be." She reached into her cardigan pocket and set the brass key on the table between them. Thad knew that key. He'd watched his father carry it on a leather cord around his neck for 7 years, and never once hand it to anybody. You can have until dark, she said. It was already dark. He looked at the key, then at her. Why do you hate me? He wasn't angry when he said it. That was the strange part. He just wanted to understand it. Understanding how things fit together was the one thing he had always been good at. Give him a busted chair, and he could tell you which joint let go first and why. Give him 7 years of a woman's silence, and he couldn't make the pieces meet. For a second, Rowena didn't answer. For a second he thought he saw the tiredness crack open into something underneath. Something that looked almost like fear. Then it closed. I don't hate you, she said. I just can't afford you. And Thad almost asked what that meant. Because there was the savings account. There was the truck. There was the whole warm house standing around them, paid for, lights on. Except he looked down and saw her hand lying flat on the table, white-knuckled. And he understood that something was wrong in that house. Something deeper than him. Something she was not going to say out loud to a boy she was about to put outside. She stood, gathered the cardigan around herself, and at the door she stopped and said the thing he would carry in his chest for a long time after. There's nothing in that barn but rust, and your father's wasted years. A beat. Take it and go. Then she went upstairs, and the stairs creaked under her the same as always. And that was the end of 7 years under one roof. But she wasn't finished, because the next morning, before he'd even packed, she came down with a folded paper in her hand and set it on the table next to the cereal box. Thad looked at it. The letters swam. They always did. He got agreement. He got closing. He got a date because numbers held still for him even when words wouldn't. What is this? He said. I've sold the property. He looked up. Already? Yesterday. Signed this morning. She didn't look at him. The buyer wants the road frontage clear. Every structure on it gone. That's part of the deal. Thad felt something go cold in his stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. The barn's on the frontage. Yes. Dad left me the barn. He left you a building, Rowena said. Buildings come down. How long? She still wouldn't look at him. 30 days. 30 days. He stood there with the cereal box in his hand like an idiot. Like a man holding a thing he'd forgotten he was holding. 30 days. Which is what? Which is a month. Which is nothing. Which is less than nothing when you've got $11 and no truck, and you cannot read a legal document to save your own life. Say something. Say something but that was the trouble with being a hand person in a mouth person's world. The words came about 4 hours late. Every single time. He packed his life into one duffel bag. It didn't take long. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, a coat, a toothbrush, and a photograph of a woman holding a baby, wrapped in a sock, so the corners wouldn't bend. The woman was his mother. He'd been the baby. On the back, in his father's careful block print, 3 words and no date. The spring before Thad. He didn't need to look at it. He had her face memorized down to the last line, the little gap in her front teeth, the way she was laughing at whoever held the camera. Not at the baby, at the person behind the lens. He'd worked out years ago that the person behind the lens had to have been his father. Which meant that photograph was a picture of 2 people in love, taken by one of them. Which meant he was standing in it. 7 winters he'd lived in that house with Rowena, and in all that time, she had never once asked him a single thing about that face. Not her name, not how she died, not what she'd been like. He had become a piece of furniture nobody had chosen. Set in a corner, walked around, and now even the corner was being taken back. He was zipping the bag when Josiah appeared in the doorway. The kid stood there a minute, working up to it. Josiah wasn't cruel. Not really. He was just a kid who'd figured out early that going along with his mother was easier than crossing her. And nobody had ever made him pay for that lesson. That's messed up, Josiah said finally. What she's doing. Thad shrugged. It's her house. Josiah picked at the doorframe. You want me to, I don't know, talk to her? Thad looked at him, and the offer was real. It was, It was also the kind of offer that costs the person making it absolutely nothing. And they both knew it. "It's fine," Thad said. "Don't." Josiah nodded, relieved, and that relief told Thad everything he needed to know about where he stood in that house. He went out the back door with his bag, and that's when he found Ranger. The old hound was lying on the porch boards in the cold, which was wrong. Ranger always slept inside by the stove. 11 years old, gray to the eyebrows, gone stone deaf 2 winters back, and lately he'd taken to following Everett, from room to room like a shadow that hadn't been told its man was gone. Thad went back inside. Rowena was at the kitchen window. "Why is the dog out there?" he said. "He stinks." She didn't turn around. "And the vet wants money I don't have for an animal that's mostly dead already." "He's old, Thad. He's useless." Same flat voice she'd used about the barn. Thad went back out and looked down at him. The dog couldn't hear a word of any of it. But he lifted that gray head and found Thad's face, and his tail moved once against the boards. He was 6 weeks old, and I was 8 years old, and my mother had been in the ground for 2 years. And Dad came home with him inside his coat. Didn't say anything, just set him in my lap, because Dad never could say the thing. He could only build it, or carry it home, or set it in your lap. "I'll take him," Thad said. "Good," Rowena said, and shut the window. So Thad crouched down and put his hand flat on the dog's chest, because that was how you talk to Ranger now. That words were gone, and the old hound got slowly to his feet. And the two of them went down the porch steps together. The boy and the deaf old dog, out into a yard going hard with frost. Halfway across, Thad turned and looked back. The windows were yellow and warm. Up in the second floor glass, Josiah stood watching him go. A thin shape against the light, not waving, not moving. Then the curtain fell across the window, and the shape was gone. Thad turned around and kept walking. His breath came out in clouds. Somewhere behind him, a man he'd loved his whole life was 2 days in the ground. And somewhere ahead of him, a locked building was waiting, that the whole world had agreed was worth nothing. He had $11. And a dog who couldn't hear him. That was the sum total of everything his life had come to. The barn stood at the far edge of the property, where the land sloped down toward the county road. It was big. Bigger than the house, steep tin roof, wide double doors, and one tall window up in the loft that caught the last of the light and held it a minute longer than the rest of the world got to. Thad had grown up looking at the outside of that building like a locked room in his own home. He set the lantern down, worked the brass key into the padlock. His hands were shaking, and he told himself it was the cold. The lock was well oiled. It opened without a fight. Of course it did. He kept it oiled. He kept everything oiled. 7 years he's been coming out here and turning this lock and going in, and never once the doors swung inward. And the first thing that hit him was the smell. Not rust, not rot, not mice, not the sour dead air of a place left to die. Cedar, linseed oil, clean sawdust, the exact smell of his childhood, the whole of it all at once, 6 years old on a high stool, with a chisel in his hands, and it rolled out of that dark doorway and over him like a wave. Thad put his hand on the frame and stood there, because he could not make his legs work. Ranger walked straight in, like he'd been there yesterday. Thad lifted the lantern and followed. The light pushed the dark back a few feet at a time, and what it showed him made no sense against anything he had ever been told. The floor was swept, not clean-ish, swept, corners and all. The tools hung on the walls in neat rows, everyone inside a painted outline, oiled, bright, sharp enough to catch the lantern and throw it back. A long workbench ran down the center of the room, and above it, on a nail, hung his father's leather apron, exactly where it had always hung, like the man had stepped out for a minute and would be back before the light went. Thad stared at it. And that was when he noticed the rest. Shapes, all down the length of that long room. Covered in white dust sheets. Big shapes and small ones. A dozen of them. More. standing there in the dark like a congregation waiting for somebody to start. Thad set the lantern on the bench. His heart was going hard. He walked to the nearest one, tall near his own height, the cloth soft and clean under his fingers, not a speck of dust on it because somebody had been changing these sheets. He took hold of one corner and pulled. The sheet slid off and pooled at his feet, and Thad Vance forgot to breathe. It was a desk, a tall secretary desk, drop front, a row of small drawers behind it, each one with a face of figured walnut. So deep the grain seemed to move under the lantern light, like water, like something alive that had agreed to hold still. The wood had been rubbed to a soft shine, not varnish, oil in hours, weeks of hours, the kind of finish you only get by doing it and stopping and coming back and doing it again. Thad ran his thumb along the corner, where two boards met, and felt no seam at all, only the small, even teeth of a dovetail joint, cut so clean it looked like a machine had done it. No machine had done it. His father's hands had done it. They said he never made a dime. They said he was a tinkerer. I have been called slow my entire life. Every teacher, every kid at the co-op, every man at the feed store who talked slower when he talked to me, and even a slow man can look at this and see it. This is not the work of somebody who wasted anything. He went down the row, pulling sheets, and each one came off like a held breath let go. A dining table, the top a single slab of pale wood, with a dark river of grain running its whole length. The edges left a little wild where the tree had been the tree. A paper tag hanging from one leg on a loop of string. Then chairs. 4. Then 6. The spindles all turned to match every one. A low dresser against the wall, old, much older than the rest, its veneer split and lifting. And beside it a second dresser, which had to be the same piece. After his father got done with it, the cracks gone, the wood whole again, standing there like a photograph of what it had been before somebody stopped loving it. A rocking horse with a real horsehair mane, a blanket chest of cedar with a climbing rose carved across the lid, so fine you wanted to put your hand on it just to prove it was wood, and not something that had grown there. And at the end of the row, near the cold stove, something still clamped together, unfinished, the glue not yet dry under a dozen wooden clamps. Thad knew what it was, before his mind caught up to his eyes. A cradle, a baby's cradle, slats bent in a gentle curve, one rocker shaped and sanded, and one rocker still a rough board, waiting for the spokeshave. His father had been in the middle of making it the day his heart stopped. Thad stood over it a long time, then he reached out and gave it the smallest push, and it rocked, slow and even, exactly the way it had been built to. Ranger came and lay down beside it on the swept floor, put his chin on his paws, and went to sleep. The order book was on the workbench, under a jar of pencils. Thad opened it and turned the pages slow, because pages were always slow for him. The letters slid around, same as ever, traded places, wouldn't hold, but the numbers held still, and the drawings held still, and between those two things he could read enough. Names, page after page of names, and next to each one, a small precise drawing of a piece of furniture, and a date, and figures, deposit paid here, balance owed there. The walnut table with the wild edge had a name beside it, and the words half down and a number. Thad read that number twice, then sat down hard on the stool. That's a year of groceries. That's one table. He turned the page. More numbers, real numbers, serious money, written out in a steady hand next to 40 different jobs going back years. His father had been charging. His father had been earning. And every one of those figures had been written inside this room, behind a padlock in a town that spent 3 decades calling Everett Vance a man who never made a dime. Pinned to the wall above the bench was a list. Thad worked through it letter by letter. Took him 4 minutes. He didn't care. It was a waiting list. Names, dates, some of them a year out. People had been waiting, a year, to pay his father to build them something. There was more on that wall. A corkboard crowded with paper so full it had a second layer. Thad leaned in, Photographs, mostly. A young couple standing in front of a finished hutch, beaming. The man's hand on the wood like he was touching a horse. An old woman seated in a rocking chair, with her hand pressed to her mouth. A church pew, newly mended. And notes. Dozens. All different hands. Some pen, some pencil, one in a child's crayon. Thank you, Everett. We can never repay you. God bless you, Everett Vance. And on a spike beside the board, a stack of work tickets. Thad lifted them off and thumbed through. Across the bottom of more than a few in his father's careful print, the same two words over and over and over, and no charge. No charge. No charge. Thad stood there holding them. He gave it away. He built all this, and he had a waiting list a year long, and he gave half of it away. And she called it wasted years. And I believed her. Not out loud. Not even to myself, really. But somewhere in the back of it, some part of me sat in that house for 7 years and let her tell me what my own father was. And I never once checked. I never once walked down here and knocked on the door. He set the tickets back on the spike. His hands weren't steady. There was a potbelly stove in the corner. And beside it, a box of kindling and split wood. Stacked. Ready. Like the man had only stepped out for the evening and meant to be back before it got cold. Thad laid a fire the same way he'd been taught, before he was old enough to read. Got it going on the second match. The iron ticked as it warmed. Heat spread out into the room and pushed the cold back into the corners where it belonged. He found a roll of moving blankets, the soft kind, for wrapping furniture, and made himself a bed on the floor near the stove. He took the photograph of his mother out of his bag and propped it against the leg of the bench where he could see it. Ranger circled twice, lay down against his back. A warm weight, ribs rising and falling. And for the first time, since the funeral, the hard thing in Thad's chest loosened by a fraction. He didn't cry. He just lay there in the smell of cedar and watched the firelight move on the underside of the loft. 30 days. 30 days, and they take all of it. Every sheet, every joint, every hour he spent out here after everyone else went to bed. Bulldozed. For a road. I can't read the paper that says so. I've got $11. I don't know a lawyer's name. I don't know what any of this is worth. I don't know who to call, and I couldn't dial half the numbers without somebody reading them to me first. He turned over, put his hand flat on the old dog's chest. But I know one thing. He locked this door for 7 years and told me to stay out. And then he left me the key. He wanted me in here. He wanted me in here so bad he put it in a will. So there's something in this room I haven't found yet. And I've got 30 days to find it. Somewhere in there he fell asleep. And he slept better in that cold barn than he had slept in 7 months in a warm house. A truck door slammed in the yard and woke him. Gray morning light came through the high window and laid itself in a long bar across the floor. Thad got up stiff, went to the doors, and there was an old man climbing down out of a battered flatbed. Canvas coat, white beard gone stiff with frost, a face like a walnut burl, all knots and weather. The old man stopped when he saw Thad standing in the doorway, and stood there in the cold with his breath smoking. "You're the boy," he said. Thad nodded. "Everett's boy." "Yes, sir." The old man looked past him, through the open doors, at the firelit shapes standing uncovered down the length of that long room, at the walnut secretary, with its drawers catching the gray light, at the table with the wild edge, and his jaw worked under the white beard. He had to look away at the treeline for a second, before he could speak again. "Alvin Threadgill," he said. "I run the salvage and lumber yard out on the county road." He wiped his mouth with the back of his glove. "Knew your daddy, since we were both too young to know better. Cut and sold him his wood for 30-some years. He paused. "Heard at the feed store this morning that she put you out." Thad didn't say anything. "Heard she handed you this barn like it was a punishment." The old man shook his head. Slow. "Lord, she's got no idea what she did. Does she?" "No, sir," Thad said. "I don't think she does." Alvin came up and stood in the doorway, and took the wool cap off his head. An old man standing bareheaded in the cold in front of a dead friend's work. He didn't say anything for a while. Then, I begged him, for years, to let folks see this room. He turned the cap over in his hands. He never would. Said the work could speak for itself once it left the barn. Said a man doesn't need to stand next to a thing taking bows. Almost a smile. Stubborn. You've got no notion how stubborn. Thad looked down the row and made himself ask it, because he had $11 and a deaf dog and 29 days. What's it worth? Came out ugly. He heard it come out ugly, with the man's grief still standing right there in the open, and he pushed through anyway. The pieces. What are they worth? Alvin didn't take offense. He walked over to the secretary desk and laid one knotted hand flat on the top. The way you greet a horse you haven't seen in a while. This one, he said. Dealer I know in the city would give you $4,000 for it. And sell it for $9,000. Thad didn't move. Alvin walked to the table. This, with the live edge and the matched chairs. He tapped the paper tag hanging off the leg. Somebody already commissioned that. Paid half down. You finish the few pieces he didn't and deliver it, that's the other half coming to you. He turned and swept the cap around at the whole room. Son, there is more value standing in this barn than there is in that house your stepmother is so proud of. A beat. And that's before you ever pick up a tool yourself. Thad looked at all of it, and the size of it came down on him like weather. For $1,000. One desk. For $1,000. And there's 20 more sheets down, that wall I haven't even pulled. And in 29 days a man with a machine is going to come down that slope, and he opened his mouth to say the thing about the 30 days. And what came out instead was the other thing. The thing he had never said out loud to anybody in his entire life. I can't read good. It just fell out of him. The order book. The names. I can barely get through it. I can't. He stopped and waited. Here it comes. Because I know exactly what faces do next. I've watched it happen 100 times. The little shift. The recalculation. The moment somebody's whole opinion of you drops one floor down and stays there. 3, 2. It didn't come. Alvin Threadgill just looked at him. Then looked at the long table. Can you read that? He said. And nodded at it. Thad turned. Looked at the table. At the joints. At the proportion. At the dark ribbon of grain set to run dead center down the middle of that top, which was not luck, which was a man standing over a slab with a chalk line and a decision. Yes, Thad said. I can read that. Then you can read the only language that matters in this room. Alvin put his cap back on. The rest is paperwork. Paperwork can be helped. And Thad Vance, 19 years old, 5 feet from a fire he'd built in his dead father's stove, had to turn around and pretend to check the clamps on the cradle for a minute. Because nobody had ever said that to him before. Nobody. Not one person in 19 years. Now, Alvin was already moving toward the truck. You're not spending another night out here freezing in November. I'm all right. I've got a room over the yard office. With stove. A real bed. Belonged to my boy before he moved off out west. He said it without turning around. It's yours long as you need it. I can't pay you. Did I ask you to? Mr. Threadgill. Get your dog and your bag. The old man opened the truck door. You can come back and work this barn every day God sends. But you'll sleep warm and eat hot. And that's the end of the discussion. Then he stopped. Hand on the door. And looked back. And his voice changed. Your daddy fixed more than furniture in this town, son. He just never sent a bill for the rest. He looked out at the frozen yard a moment. The winter my wife was dying. He came by my place every evening. After his own work was done. Every evening for 4 months. His hand tightened on the door frame. Built her a chair she could sleep sitting up in. When her lungs got too bad for her to lie flat. He cleared his throat. Hard. Then he'd sit with me after. By the stove. Never said but 10 words the whole night. He looked at the ground. Didn't need to. A long pause. So don't you ever talk to me about paying. They drove, into town with Ranger sitting up between them on the bench seat like he'd been promised the window. And Thad watched the fields go by. He built a chair so a dying woman could sleep sitting up. He never told me that. He never told me any of it. 12 years I lived in the same house as that man, and he told me how the grain runs and how to hold a chisel, and he never told me one single thing he did for anybody. But why would you not? And then quieter, because he wasn't doing it to be told about. That's why. Except there was a thing Alvin Threadgill did not say in that truck. And it sat in the old man's chest the whole way, into town heavy as a stone. Because 9 years earlier, when the school sent the letter home and Everett Vance came, into the salvage yard white-faced holding it, Alvin had said a thing. The kind of thing you say to 2 or 3 men at a counter without thinking it matters. Some of 'em just aren't built for much, Everett. Best you make peace with it early. Everett Vance never brought it up again. Never mentioned it. Not once. He just stopped bringing the boy to the lumber yard. And Alvin had worked out why about 4 years too late. So when the old man said, "Don't you ever talk to me about paying," he wasn't only talking about the chair. The diner sat on Main, with steam fogging its windows against the cold. A woman ran it. 68 years old, broad and quick, reading glasses pushed up, into gray hair, a dish towel permanently, over one shoulder like a badge of office. Maribel Kersey. She took one look at Thad coming, through the door behind Alvin, and came around the counter, and stopped in front of him. "You're Everett's," she said. "Yes, ma'am. Of course you are." Her eyes went down to his hands. "You've got his hands." And then she pressed her lips together hard, and looked at the ceiling for a second. "Sit," she said. She put a plate in front of him he hadn't ordered. Eggs, ham, biscuits, gravy in a separate cup because she didn't know how he took it, and she stood over him while he ate the first 3 bites, like she needed to watch it go in. "Word travels," she said. "We all heard what she did, putting Everett's boy out the same week we buried him." She shook her head at the window. "There are people in this town that wouldn't have a stick of furniture or a roof over a bed if it weren't for your father. A beat. Me included." Thad looked up. "The flood," Maribel said. "The year the creek came up, over the low end of the street." She wiped her hands on the towel. "They were already dry. Took everything I had down there, and I lost my mother's hope chest." Her voice went careful. "Oldest thing I owned. Came apart in the water like a cracker. I stood in 2 feet of mud looking at it, and I called it trash. Out loud. I said that's trash, and I turned my back on it." She stopped. "Your daddy came the next morning, and took the pieces away. Didn't ask. Didn't say a word to me about it. 3 weeks later he carried it back into my kitchen, put back together better than new." Her chin went up. "And when I got out my checkbook, he got in his truck and drove off. Wouldn't even let me say it proper." She stood there a moment. 31 years I've had it since. It's in my front room right now." Her voice caught on the last of it. "So you eat. You hear me? Your money's no good in here. Not now. Not ever." Thad ate. And the warmth of it, the food, and the woman standing over him, and the 2 old men at the counter who kept not looking at him in a way that meant they were listening to every word, it got into him. And made his eyes sting. So he kept his head down over the plate. Because you don't cry in a diner at 9 in the morning. Not in a town this size. It was on the drive back that they saw the stakes. A man in a county jacket stood at the edge of the road at the foot of the property, driving a wooden stake into frozen ground with a sledge. A second stake was already in, and strung between them, a banner of bright orange tape, snapping in the wind. And leaning against the fence post, a real estate sign with a smaller placard wired to the bottom of it. "Sale pending." Alvin slowed the truck. Stopped. Sat there with both hands on the wheel. "She's selling," he said. "The whole place." 30 days, Thad said. "She told me 30 days. The buyer wants the frontage clear." Clear. Every structure on it. Alvin's hands didn't move on the wheel. "Can she do that?" Thad said. "The barn's mine. The lawyer said so." "It's yours." The old man said it slow. "The barn. and the half-acre under it. But the rest, the house, the road frontage, all of that's hers to sell. He frowned at the orange tape. Then he leaned forward over the wheel and looked a long moment at exactly where those stakes were driven, and then down the slope, at the barn, and back at the stakes, and something came over his face that Thad couldn't put a name to. Not surprise, something slower than that, something arithmetic. What? Thad said. Nothing. Too fast. Maybe nothing. He put the truck in gear. Let me make a call or two before I go saying a thing I can't take back. That afternoon Thad walked back down to the barn alone, because he couldn't sit still up in that warm room over the yard office with all of it churning in him, because standing near the last thing his father had ever touched felt like standing near the man himself. He laid his hand on the bent slats of the cradle, and that's when he saw it, a roll of paper, tucked on the shelf under the bench, behind the jar of pencils, where he'd missed it in the dark the first night. He pulled it out, heavy, a thick roll of drawings, tied with a leather bootlace. He worked the knot loose, unrolled it on the bench, weighted the corners with a chisel and a mallet. The top sheet was a bed, a good one, a real one, headboard of joined panels, every peg drawn in, and in the corner, in his father's careful block capitals, 2 words. And these 2 words Thad Vance did not have to puzzle out letter by letter, because he had been reading them his whole life. For Thad, he turned to the next sheet, a writing table. For Thad, the next, a tall chest of drawers. For Thad, sheet after sheet after sheet, a bookshelf, a deep chair sized for a grown man to read in, a whole house full of furniture, every piece drawn and labeled and dated. And Thad's eyes went to the dates, and found the earliest one, and stopped. 7 years ago, the year he turned 12, the year his father put a padlock on that door and looked him in the face and said, "Stay out of there." No, that's the same year. That's the exact same year. He locked me out of this room and started building me a house full of furniture in it. On the same, why would you do that? Why would you shut me out of the one place I ever, and then fill it up with things meant for me? Thad stood there with both hands flat on those drawings, heart going hard, and that was when he heard the sound, a small sound, down low. He looked up. Ranger was standing at the foot of the ladder that ran up to the loft. Gray head tipped all the way back, staring up into the dark above the rafters. The old deaf dog let out a low whine, scratched once at the bottom rung, and would not look away. Thad set the drawings down, crossed the floor. "Hey!" Nothing. The dog didn't turn, couldn't hear him, just leaned his gray weight against Thad's leg, and kept his nose pointed up at the dark, over the rafters. And whined again, deeper, from somewhere down in his chest. "All right?" Thad said, knowing the dog couldn't hear a word of it, saying it anyway, because that's what you do. "All right, let me look." He carried the lantern up the rungs, one at a time, and lifted it into the loft, and the light pushed the dark back maybe 2 feet. Enough to show him crates, the corner of a sheet, and the shoulder of something tall standing under cloth. Something tall, dust turning slow in the flame. Thad held the lantern out at arm's length, and made himself stop. No, not like this, because he was standing on old dry floorboards in a loft packed with timber and 30 years of dust, holding an open flame, in the one building in the world that held everything his father had ever made. One spill, one knock, and all of it goes up, every sheet, every joint, every hour. Tomorrow, daylight, no flame. He backed down the ladder, rung by rung, and Ranger sat at the bottom and watched him come down and did not move and did not stop looking up. That night Thad slept in the warm room, over the yard office, and the old dog lay across the door like he was guarding it. And down at the bottom of the property, in a barn with a cold stove and 20 white sheets, and a cradle with one rocker still unshaped, the loft sat dark over the rafters, holding everything. 28 days. 28 days. That's what Thad Vance woke up to. Not a sunrise. Not a rooster. A number. He lay in a stranger's son's bed in a room, over a lumber yard, and did the arithmetic before his feet ever hit the floor. 28 days to empty a barn he couldn't legally defend, with money he didn't have, against paperwork he couldn't read. Get up, get up, get up, he got up. He went back to the barn at first light. Not to the loft. Not yet, because there was a table down on the floor, with a paper tag hanging off its leg. Half paid. Waiting. And Alvin Threadgill's voice was still in his head. You finish the few he didn't and deliver it, and that's the other half coming to you. Which meant money. Which meant maybe a lawyer. Thad spread the plans out on the bench and looked at them. And here's the thing. Reading them was the easiest thing he had done in 4 years. The lines made sense. The lines had always made sense. Nobody ever put a clock on a drawing. Nobody ever stood over him tapping a pencil, while a set of dimensions rearranged themselves on the page. The numbers held still. The angles held still. And where the drawing said a spindle went, and it either seated or it didn't, and there was no teacher on God's earth who could tell him he'd done it wrong, when the chair stood level on the floor. There was one chair left unfinished. It needed its back spindles set, and the whole thing rubbed with oil. Thad fit the first spindle, and it went home with a soft knock. And something in his chest went quiet for the first time in 5 days. He lost the whole morning to it. Never once thought about being cold, or hungry, or thrown away. He found the oil and a clean rag and worked it into the wood until the grain came up dark and alive under his hands, and there's a moment when you're oiling walnut where the color just arrives. Like the wood was holding its breath, and finally let it out. His father had shown him that when he was 8. He'd remembered it for 11 years, without once being asked to. Alvin came at noon with sandwiches from the diner. Stood in the doorway while without saying anything. You did the chair. It needed doing. The old man came over. Ran his thumb along the joint where the spindle met the rail. And stopped. And ran it again. He said, which from Alvin Threadgill was a standing ovation. We deliver it today. Today. A finished table does nobody any good standing in a barn. He was already looking for the moving blankets. And those people paid half and grieved long enough. I don't know where they live. I do. I don't know how to. Son. The old man stopped. You built the chair. I'll drive. Between the two of us there's one whole man. Get the blankets. They drove out past the edge of town to a small house, with a wide porch. A young couple came out, the husband holding a baby on his hip. And Thad and Alvin carried that table in, and set it in the front room and pulled the blankets off. And the wife put both hands over her mouth. That's the tree, she said. Her voice came out thin. Beckett, that's our tree. It had been a walnut in their own front yard. Planted by the husband's grandfather. Brought down by the same August storm that took the old man himself. They couldn't bear to cut it up for firewood. Couldn't bear to leave it lying there either. So Everett Vance had hauled the trunk away in his truck and promised them something. He showed me the plan, the husband said, 2 weeks before he passed. Sat right there at that window and showed me the drawing. He shifted the baby. We figured it died with him. Thad ran his hand along the live edge, where the bark line still showed. My father doesn't leave things half done, he said. And only after it was out of his mouth did he hear it. Doesn't. Present tense. Nobody corrected him. The wife went and got the envelope. $1,000. She pressed it into his hand and folded his fingers over it and held them shut with both of hers. He'd have wanted you to have it. She looked at her husband, then back. We heard what happened to you. It's all right. It is not all right. Her jaw set. Your father sat up 2 nights with our boy when he had the croup. So bad we were scared out of our minds. Clinic's 40 miles. We had no gas money and no phone that month. Her eyes went bright. He just showed up. 2 nights. Never said how he knew. She let go of his hand. People don't know the half of what that man did. Thad rode back to town with $1,000 in his coat pocket and didn't say one word the entire way. because if he opened his mouth he was going to break. And he did not want Alvin Threadgill to see that happen. Maribel Kersey sat him down that evening after close. Empty diner. Chairs up on tables. One light on over the counter. A cup of coffee, the order book, and a shoebox. "You can't carry cash around in your coat like a fool," she said. Not unkindly. "I don't have a bank. You will tomorrow. And we are going to keep this book straight, you and me." She tapped the page. "Here's how it works. I read you the names and I write down what you tell me. You tell me what each piece is and what it's worth." She pushed her glasses up. "You know that part. I'll do the letters." Thad looked at the shoebox. At the book. At her glasses. "Why?" Maribel didn't even look up. "Because I'm good with letters and you're good with wood." She tapped the table once. "And because between the two of us there's a whole person. Now drink your coffee before it goes cold. I'm not making another pot. Between the two of us there's a whole person. They always want you to be a whole person by yourself. That's the whole game. That's every teacher, every form, every man at the co-op with a clipboard. Be a whole person by yourself or be nothing. And this woman she just split it in half like it was a check." He drank the coffee and did not trust his voice for about 4 minutes. And Maribel Kersey, 68, widowed, running a diner alone for 19 years, able to read a man across a counter the way Thad could read a board, pretended very hard to be looking for a pen. And did not say the thing she was thinking, which was this: "I watched that woman walk you around town like a bag she was tired of carrying. For 7 years. And I said nothing. Because it wasn't my business. Because your father never asked. Because it's easier. And your daddy is dead now. And you're sleeping in a barn. And I get to sit here handing you a shoebox. And calling it kindness." She found the pen. "Sit up straight," she said. "You'll ruin your back." So that was how it went, for a stretch of days Thad would remember later as the good ones. He worked the barn by daylight. Slept warm at night. Maribel kept his book. The $1,000 sat in a real account with his name on it, which he had signed with enormous care 3 times because the first 2 came out wrong, and the teller had been very kind about it, and the kindness was almost worse. And word got around that Everett Vance's boy was working the barn. And folks started coming down the slope. An old farmer named Wendell Poteet brought a chair with a busted leg. His wife had sat in it since the day they married. He was shy about it. Kept turning his hat. "I wondered if you might, if it's the kind of thing the way your daddy would've." Thad turned it over. Found where the joint had let go. "Come back Thursday." The man reached for his wallet. "Wait and see if you like it first." Because that's what Everett always said. And Wendell Poteet looked at him soft and strange. Like he'd just heard a voice he knew coming out of the wrong mouth. A woman came about a cradle for a grandbaby due in June. A man wanted his grandfather's gun cabinet brought back from ruin. And every single one of them stopped in the doorway first. And looked down that long room at the uncovered pieces. And said some version of the same 6 words. "We never knew. All this time we never knew. Except, the good days had a hole in the middle of them. And the hole was this: Thad had not gone up that ladder. He'd meant to. Every morning. And every morning some living, breathing person came down. That slope with a broken thing in their hands, and a look on their face, and the loft waited. And Ranger sat at the bottom of that ladder every single day. Nose up. Not moving. Dog knows something, Alvin said. Dog's 11 and deaf. Dog knew your daddy his whole life. The old man went back to sorting boards. I take his word over most men's. On the 9th morning, Thad came down the slope and stopped 40 feet from the doors, because there was a steel hasp screwed across them. New, bright, the screws still shining, and a fat padlock hanging off it, and a sheet of paper taped to the wood. Thad walked up to it, and stood there in the cold, and tried to read it. Estate, that word he got, that one held still long enough. Property, got that. Do not remove, got that too because it was all caps and short. And the rest slid out from under him like it always did. Whole lines just gone, rearranged. a paragraph of black marks that meant something to everybody in the world except the man they were addressed to. He read the first line 4 times. For, standing there in the frost in front of his own building. Come on. Come on. It's right there. It's 4 inches from your face. It's your barn. It's your father's name at the top. It's about you. And you are standing in a field like an animal that's been shown a map. His hands were shaking. Not from cold. This is the part they never tell you about. Everybody thinks it's about books. Sitting out reading class. Some kid laughing. It's not. It's this. It's a piece of paper nailed to your life. And every man who can read it gets to decide what it says. He drove to the diner. Handed it to Maribel without a word. She read it, through twice, and her mouth got thinner each time. It says the contents are part of your father's estate, she said. Says you're not to remove or sell anything pending review. She set it down. It's got a lawyer's letterhead, but it is not the one who read you the will. She took her glasses off. And this is her doing. Prosper Halstead was plain about it on the phone. The will left no room. None. The building, the parcel, the contents, free and outright. And no paper taped to a door changed a thing about it. He'd send his own letter. And a man to take the bad padlock off. You leave it to me, son, he said. And don't you so much as raise your voice to her. Thad hung up, and felt about 2 inches taller, and 10 years more tired. Josiah was waiting by the barn the next afternoon, hands jammed in his pockets, kicking at the frozen mud, looking like he wanted to be anywhere on earth but there. I'm not supposed to be here, he said. Thad waited. She's drowning, came out in a rush, like he'd been holding it down with both hands. Mom, after your dad died, we found out. He took a second mortgage on the house, years back, and then the hospital bills, from the end and there. He stopped. They're bad, Thad. Lose the house bad. How bad? I heard her say 40,000. He wouldn't look up. She didn't know about the mortgage till after the funeral. That's why she's like this. That's why she sold so fast. The buyer's paying over. Way over. Josiah scuffed the mud. Like stupid over. For a place out here. Why? I don't know. Something about the road. The frontage. The frontage. Alvin sat in that truck and looked at those stakes for 30 seconds, and wouldn't say what he was thinking. And now the kid says frontage. What is it about that road? What is it about the Thad? Josiah's voice cracked on it. She's gonna try and clear the barn out before your lawyer can stop her. I heard her on the phone. Clear it out how? Sell it. All of it. She's been calling around. He finally looked up, and his eyes were wet and ashamed. I couldn't just let her. Not after whatever it did for me. Thad went very still. What did he do for you? He wasn't being hard about it. He genuinely, standing there in the cold, 19 years old, he genuinely did not know. Josiah wiped his nose on the back of his hand. When we moved in I was 10. And I was fine for about a year and then I wasn't. Failing everything. Getting in trouble. Hating it here. A beat. Hating you, kind of. No offense. None taken. And your dad didn't yell at me. Didn't ground me. Didn't tell Mom. Josiah shrugged. And the shrug came apart halfway. The winter I turned 12, he just started taking me out to the barn some evenings. Taught me to make a box. A dumb little dovetailed box. He almost laughed. Took me a whole month. I ruined about 9 corners. He looked at the barn doors. First thing I ever finished in my life. I've still got it under my bed. His voice went thin. He never told her about that either. Said a man's allowed one place that's just his. He stopped, and Thad watched a 17-year-old kid try to hold his face together in a frozen yard. He was more of a dad to me than my real one was ever going to be. Josiah's jaw worked. And now she's about to sell off everything he ever built to a hauler for pocket change. And I can't stop her. He turned to go. And you're the only one who can. For a second the two of them just stood there. 2 boys who'd lost the same quiet man. Neither sure what to do with the other. Get the good stuff out, Josiah said. Somewhere safe. That's all I came to say. And he walked off up the slope before Thad could answer. Thad stood in that yard a long time after he was gone. 12. He took him out there when he was 12. That's the year. That's the exact year he padlocked that door on me. He locked out his son at 12, and he walked another man's boy in at 12. Same age. Same door. He didn't say it out loud, but something in his chest went sideways and stayed there for the rest of the afternoon. Because there is a particular kind of hurt that only lands when you find out somebody else got the thing you were told you couldn't have. And it doesn't matter one bit that you like the person. It still lands. So he climbed the ladder, because he was out of days and out of patience, and because a 17-year-old had just told him a story about a dovetailed box that he could not sit with 1 minute longer. Gray daylight. No lantern. Ranger whining at the bottom, too old and stiff in the hips to follow. Thad came up through the hatch, and the high window let in enough light to see by at last. He pulled the first sheet, and it was the bed, the one from the drawing. Headboard of joined panels, the wood golden and warm, every peg set flush, and sanded so smooth you couldn't feel where it ended. Finished, not in progress, not clamped. Finished. He pulled the next, the tall chest of drawers, the next, the writing table, then a bookshelf, then a deep chair, sized for a grown man to read in by a fire, the arms worn smooth at the front edge, where somebody had run his thumbs over them 1,000 times checking the finish. Every piece from the roll of plans, every single one. Finished and waiting under a clean white sheet in a locked loft. Built over 7 years. In the hours after everyone else in that house was asleep. This is why. Thad sat down on a crate. This is what he wasn't ready for me to see. A whole house full of furniture. For a house I don't have. For a life I hadn't started yet. He was building me somewhere to go. Since I was 12. Since the year I came home with the letter from the school. And he never said one word. 7 years. Not one word. He let me stand out in that yard at 12 years old and think my own father didn't want me in his shop. He put his hands over his face. And in the corner of the loft, set apart from the rest, stood a cedar chest with a climbing rose carved across the lid. The twin of the one downstairs. Thad knelt in front of it. It wasn't locked. He lifted the lid, and the smell of cedar came up at him like a hand on the back of the neck. And on top of everything, laid flat, squared to the corners the way that man squared everything, an envelope, with his name on it, in his father's print. The letter was written in pencil, in big, plain, block capitals, and Thad understood, before he read a single word, why it had been written that way. He wrote it so I could read it. He sat down and wrote a letter to his son in block capitals, so his son could get through it alone, without anybody standing over him, without anybody helping. He thought about that. He sat there and thought about that, and then he did it. Son, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you found your way into this room at last. I am sorry I kept you out of it. I wanted all of this to be a surprise for the day you got your own place. I ran out of days before you got it. Thad sat down flat on the dusty floorboards and kept reading. You were never slow. You think with your hands, same as me. The world is just too loud to notice the quiet ones who build things. Everything in this barn you already know how to do. I taught you before you could read. It is all still in your hands. Trust them. There was a photograph folded into the letter. His mother, younger than the one in his sock, laughing at whoever held the camera. Head tipped back, one hand up to keep her hair out of her face. And beneath the photograph, deeper in the chest, her things. A thin gold ring, a hair comb with 2 teeth missing, and a packet of old letters, tied with a leather bootlace exactly like the one that had bound the plans. Thad worked one loose, unfolded it slow, afraid the paper might come apart in his fingers. And it was her handwriting, smaller and rounder than his father's. A letter she'd written to Everett, before Thad was ever born. He tried to read it, one word at a time. I can't, that's a name maybe. That's not a name. Hope. That's Hope. I know Hope. The lines swam. Slid. Reordered themselves out of spite. And he got maybe one word in 5. His mother. His own mother's voice. On a page. For inches from his eyes. And he could not have it. Come on. Come on, please, just this once, just. He put the letter down. And pressed the heels of both hands into his eyes. And sat there on the floor of that loft in the gray light, with his mother's words in his lap. Locked out. Again. Then he made himself turn back to his father's letter. To the last lines. Block capitals. The ones he could read. There is one more thing I left you. It is the most important, and it is not for them to find. Lift the bottom of this chest. The board comes up, if you press the back left corner. Thad set the letter down. Reached into the chest, past his mother's folded things, and pressed his thumb into the back left corner. And that's when a truck door slammed in the yard. Not Alvin's. Alvin's door had a rattle to it. 2 doors. Then a third. Then voices. Then a woman's voice, sharp, cutting through the cold air, and Thad knew. That voice before he could make out a single word of it. He came down that ladder so fast he took the last 4 rungs at once. Out through the doors. Into the light. There were 3 vehicles in the yard. Rowena's car. A white pickup with a company decal on the door, clean as a showroom. And a flatbed hauling rig with the engine still running. And a man in a canvas jacket walking down the length of the barn with a clipboard. Sticking numbered tags on things. On things. Little orange tags. On a leg. On a drawer front. On the corner of the cedar chest with the rose. Hey! Nobody looked up. Hey! The man with the clipboard turned. You Vance. That's my father's work. I'm the appraiser. He held up the clipboard like a badge. Estate auction. I tag, I list, I go home. Don't shoot the messenger. There's no auction. There's a notice. The notice is wrong. My lawyer. Take it up with the seller. He tagged a chair. I just do numbers. Rowena was standing by her car. Coat open. Face tight. Not coming closer. Thad walked straight at her. You said 30 days. I know what I said. It's been 10. The buyer moved the closing. Fast like a woman reading off a card. It's not up to me. You said 30 days. And now it's 15. The world went very quiet. 15. The auction's the 24th. She still wouldn't look at him. Everything in the building gets sold, as one lot or piece by piece, whichever brings more. Then the structure comes down. That's my father's. It's an estate, Thaddeus. It's mine. Halstead said. Halstead can say whatever he likes. And now she did look at him. And there was something behind her eyes that was not cruelty. That was much worse than cruelty. By the time 3 lawyers are done arguing about it, the closing will have happened. And I will have my money, and you will have a very strong letter. She knows. She knows she's wrong, and she's doing it anyway, because she's not doing it to win. She's doing it to be fast. She's not fighting me. She's outrunning me. Why? Thad said. And it came out the same way it had come out in that kitchen. Not angry. Just needing the pieces to fit. Rowena's hand went to her collar. And for 1 second, 1 single second, that tiredness cracked open again into the thing underneath. Because I have 19 days to find $40,000, she said. And you have a barn. Then she got in her car. They took 11 pieces that afternoon. Thad stood in the doorway and could not stop them, because the appraiser had a paper, and Thad had a phone call to a lawyer 2 hours away in a county seat. The rocking horse, 4 of the matched chairs, the low dresser his father had brought back from ruin, and the cedar chest, the one with the rose on the lid, and his mother's ring inside, and a false bottom he had pressed his thumb against for about 1.5 seconds before a truck door slammed. He got a hand on it. Actually got a hand on the corner of it, as 2 men lifted it toward the tailgate. That one's not. Lot 41, the appraiser said, without looking up. Sir, if you touch it, I have to call the sheriff. And neither one of us wants that. And Thad Vance, who had big careful hands, and had never once in his life raised them to anybody, let go. The truck pulled out of the yard at 4:15, and Thad stood in the frozen mud and watched his mother's ring drive up the slope in a stranger's flatbed. Ranger came and leaned against his leg, and the two of them stood there until the taillights turned onto the county road. One more thing. He said there was one more thing, and it was the most important, and it is not for them to find. And it's in that chest, and it's in the back of that truck. And I had my thumb on it. I had my thumb on it. He went back inside, sat down on the stool at the bench where his father had sat for 30 years, and put his head in his hands. Alvin found him there at dusk. The old man walked the length of the room first, counting the gaps, not saying anything. Then he came and stood by the bench. How many? 11. Which ones? Thad told him. And when he got to the cedar chest, Alvin Threadgill sat down slowly on an upturned crate, like a man whose legs had been informed of something before the rest of him. That chest, he said. What about it? Your daddy made 2 of those. Same rows, same year. Alvin took his cap off, turned it over, made one for your mother 3 months before she passed, and made the second one after. After. The old man looked at the floor. Never would say why. I asked him once. He said. He stopped, and got it right. He said, some things you build for the person, and some things you build for what's coming after the person. Thad looked up. Alvin. Yeah. What's on the road? The old man's head came up. What? The frontage. You sat in that truck and looked at those stakes for half a minute, and then you wouldn't say. Thad stood. Josiah says the buyer's paying stupid money for a place out here. Rowena says 15 days. Something's out there. What is it? Alvin was quiet a long moment. I don't know, he said. Not for certain. But I've hauled survey stakes for 40 years, son. And those stakes are set wrong. He turned the cap over again. They're set for a parcel line that doesn't match the parcel I've had in my head since 1979. Meaning what? Meaning somebody sometime split that ground. He put the cap on. And I've been trying for 10 days to remember why. That rings a bell. That night Thad didn't go up to the room over the yard office. He built a fire in his father's stove and slept on the moving blankets on the floor. And he did not sleep much. Because at some point around 2 in the morning, lying there with his hand on a deaf dog's ribs, staring at the underside of a loft that had one white sheet left in it, it came to him. Not a plan. A number. 4,000. Alvin said a dealer would give 4,000 for the secretary desk. The best thing in this room. The best thing that man ever made. $4,000. And the auction is on the 24th. And lot 41 goes up on the block with everything else. And anybody with a paddle can buy my mother's ring. Thad Vance lay in the dark of his father's barn, and did the only arithmetic that was ever going to work. Sell his best thing, to buy back her chest, and whatever's underneath it. He turned over. 15 days. And in the corner of the loft above him, under the last white sheet, a bed his father had built for him sat waiting in the dark for a house that didn't exist yet. End of part 2. 15 days. And Thad Vance spent the first 4 of them doing something that made Alvin Threadgill grind his teeth down to the gums. He worked, not on saving the barn, not on lawyers, on Wendell Poteet's chair. There's a truck coming to knock this building down. I told him Thursday. Son. I told him Thursday, Alvin. So Thad went over that whole frame. Every joint, tightened what was loose, re-glued what had let go, brought 60 years of dry oak back to life, with oil and a rag, and about 4 hours he did not have. And on Thursday morning, Wendell Poteet lowered himself into it right there on the shop floor, and rocked once, and went completely still. He sat there a long moment, then got up, and his eyes were wet, and he didn't bother about it. Sits like it did when she was young, he said. He got out his wallet. What do I owe you? Come back when you've got it. No hurry. And the old farmer looked at him soft and strange. Same look Thad had seen on four faces now. Like a voice they knew had come out of the wrong mouth. Then the dealer came. Down from the city in a long box truck with blankets and straps, and a man in the passenger seat whose only job was lifting. He walked the length of the barn slow, and didn't say much for a good while. Then he stopped at the walnut secretary, and put his hand on it, and stood there. "I know this work," he said quietly. Thad looked up. "Bought a chest at an estate sale 6-7 years back. Couldn't find out who made it. Nobody could tell me. I've asked every dealer between here and Chicago." He shook his head at the drop front. "All this time it was one man, in one barn, in a town nobody drives through. How much? For this? For that?" He named a number, and it was bigger than 4,000. And Thad closed his eyes for 1 second. "Take it. Son, hold on now." The dealer frowned. "You should know what you've got. This is the best piece in the room, and you're selling it first, which is backwards. Sell your middle work. Hold your best until you've got a name." "I don't have time to have a name. You've got a lifetime of work standing in this barn. I've got 11 days. The dealer looked at him, then down the long room, at the gaps, at the places where 11 pieces used to stand. "Ah," he said, and got out his checkbook. He wrote it, and Maribel had to read the figure out loud twice, before Thad believed it. And then, at the truck, the dealer said the other thing. "Whoever set the spindles in, that chair learned it, from the man who built this desk." He climbed up into the cab. "Anything you make yourself, going forward, I'll look at it." Sold his best thing. The best thing that man ever made in his life. And I sold it to a stranger in 11 minutes. For a box. A cedar box with a rose on it and a ring inside and something underneath that he said was the most important thing. And if I'm wrong, I sold my father's masterpiece for a dead woman's jewelry. And I lose the barn anyway. Thad stood in the doorway and watched the box truck climb the slope. "I'm not wrong." He wrote it in capitals so I could read it. He'd never have done that for jewelry. The auction was held in the old Grange Hall on the 24th. Cold morning. Folding chairs. A card table with a cash box, and a woman handing out numbered paddles. And 210 lots laid out under fluorescent lights that made everything look like it had already been thrown away. Thad walked in at 8:40 with a bank check in his coat pocket, and a paddle number he could actually read, 12, and Alvin Threadgill on one side of him and Maribel Kersey on the other. Josiah slipped in the back door at 9 and stood against the wall. Rowena did not come. Lot 41 sat on a folding table near the front. The cedar chest, rose carved across the lid, orange sticker on the corner like a price tag on a coffin. They ran the small lots first. Boxes of tools, a crate of hinges, somebody's grandmother's dishes. And Thad sat in a folding chair, with his hands on his knees, and his heart going like a bird in a box. Just wait. Wait for it. Don't bid early. Don't look at it. You're looking at it. Stop looking at it. Lot 39. Lot 40. Then, Lot 41. Cedar blanket chest. Hand-carved lid, very fine. Who'll start me at 100? Thad's paddle went up, before the man finished the sentence. 150 in the back. 200. Somebody else. 250. 350. Thank you, sir. Thad's paddle. Again. Fine, that's nothing. I've got 400. 5. 6. What? Who is? He turned around. Third row from the back. A heavy man in a Goodwill coat, with a leather folio on his knee, and a phone in his hand. Not from town. Nobody had ever seen that coat in that county. And he wasn't looking at the chest. He was looking at his phone, and raising his paddle without glancing up. 800. 9. 1,000. Thad's paddle. 1,100. 12. The coat. 1,500. Thad's paddle. His hand was shaking. 16. 17. He doesn't want it. Look at him. He's not even looking at it. He's buying it the way you buy a bag of concrete. 2,000. Fine. I've got more than that. I've got 2,500. Maribel's hand closed around Thad's wrist. Steady, she said very low. Whatever number's in your pocket, he doesn't know it. And you don't tell him. 3,000. Thad's paddle. 3,500. The coat. 4. Thad. 4,500. The coat. Still not looking up. That's the desk. That's the whole desk. That's everything he gave me, and I've got maybe 400 over it, and then I've got nothing. No money for a lawyer. No money for anything. 4,800. Thad said. Out loud. Not the paddle. His voice cracked across that hall like a plate breaking. Everybody turned. The man in the coat looked up for the first time. Looked at him. At a 19-year-old kid in a work jacket, with a carpenter's pencil behind his ear, and went back to his phone. 6,000, he said. Silence. The auctioneer looked at Thad. Thad looked at the check in his hand, which said 4,900 and some, which was every dollar he had in the world, which was not 6,000. Say something. Say something. You could, the table money, no, that's gone. The account has, it doesn't have 6. It doesn't have 6. 6,000 once. Do something. 6,000 twice. Do something. The gavel came down. Thad Vance sat back down in a folding chair in the old Grange hall, and a man in a good coat walked up to the front table and paid cash for a cedar chest he had never once looked at. And Thad watched 2 hired men carry it out the side door into the gray morning. He didn't move. Alvin put a hand on his shoulder. Thad didn't feel it. Maribel said his name twice. I sold the desk. I sold my father's best work. And I got nothing. I got outbid by a man on a phone. 6 days left and I have nothing, and I lost her ring, and I lost whatever he wrote it in capitals. He sat down and wrote it in capitals so I could read it, and I couldn't even. He got up and walked outside. Because he was going to come apart, and he was not going to do it in a folding chair. And that's where they found him. 20 minutes later, standing at the tailgate of Alvin's truck. Not crying. Just standing. Maribel Kersey came out the side door of that Grange hall. And she was not alone. There were 6 of them. 6 women. None of them under 65. Coats buttoned. Handbags on the forearm. One using a cane like a walking stick and daring anybody to comment. And they came across that gravel lot in a loose flock with Maribel out in front. Thad straightened up. Ma'am. Hush, Maribel said. Delphine, tell him. The one with the cane stepped forward. Delphine Aubuchon, 81, ran the church quilting circle since before the highway went through. Your father, she said, rebuilt the 3rd and 4th pews at Bethel Creek after the roof came in February, in his own time, wouldn't let the deacons put his name in the bulletin. Ma'am, I'm not finished. She turned her head. Farrell. Another woman. 70-something, bird thin. He made my Harold a bed board when Harold couldn't get up the stairs anymore. 11 days before Harold passed. Her chin came up. He came at night, so nobody'd see him and make a fuss. She stopped. That is the kind of man that was. And behind them the other 4 just nodded. One of them said, mine was the gun cabinet. And another said, the flood. And that was all. Because they had all been standing in that hall listening, and there was nothing left to add. Now, Delphine said, we have all of us sat in there this morning and watched a man, from out of town by Everett Vance's wife's blanket chest for $6,000, out from under his boy. She planted the cane. And we did not care for it. Ma'am, he already paid, he's already. Yes. Maribel folded her arms. He has. And then he walked out to his car. And Delphine Aubuchon, who is 81 years old, went out there and asked him what he wanted with it. And he didn't want it. Delphine's mouth pinched. He was buying inventory. Bids on carved lids for a resale outfit in the city. He said, and I am quoting the man, it's a nice piece of wood. She reached into her handbag, so I asked him what he'd take for it. Thad stared at her. He said 7.5. She sniffed. So I told him about the pews and Harold's bed board at some length. In a parking lot, in November. Delphine talked at that man for 11 minutes, Farrell said. I timed it. And he came down to 6,200 just to get in the car. Delphine turned the handbag over and handed Thad a folded receipt, and under it an envelope, thick and soft at the corners. The kind of envelope that has been sitting in a coffee can in somebody's pantry for a very long time. There's 6 of us, she said. It's not charity. Don't you dare say the word. I can't. Your father carried this valley on his back for 30 years and never sent one bill. Her cane came up an inch and went back down. The way I see it, it is our turn. Ma'am, that's $6,000, It is a little over 1,000 apiece, and Farrell put in more because she has always been a show-off. Delphine, you did put in more. I did put in more. And Thad Vance stood in a gravel parking lot, with a receipt in one hand and an envelope in the other. And 6 women, over 65, stood in a half-circle around him, with their handbags on their forearms. And nobody said anything for a second. They watched me lose. They sat in there and watched me lose. And then they went out to the parking lot. Nobody has ever, in 19 years, nobody has ever come out to the parking lot for me. He tried to say thank you. It didn't come. And Delphine Aubuchon, who had buried a husband and 2 brothers, reached up and patted him twice on the arm the way you'd pat a horse. I know, she said. It's in your face. That's enough. The chest was in the back of the man's station wagon. They carried it out and set it on Alvin's tailgate right there in the lot. Thad didn't wait. Couldn't. He opened the lid. Cedar came up at him. The ring. The comb. The letters. And he reached in past all of it, and pressed his thumb hard into the back left corner of the bottom. Click. The board lifted. Underneath was a flat bundle wrapped in oilcloth and tied with string. Thad set it on the tailgate, worked the knot loose. 6 women and 2 old men crowded in around him. The first thing inside was a folded document. Heavy paper. A county seal pressed into one corner. Most of the print swam when he tried it, but clipped to the front was a hand-drawn map. And a map he could read fine. There was the barn. There was a line drawn around the barn, and around the long strip of ground that ran down from it to the county road. And inside that line, lettered in his father's block capitals, so his son could get them with no help from anybody on earth. This is yours. Alvin Threadgill made a sound like he'd been hit. That's it, he said. That's it. That's what I couldn't put my finger on. He grabbed the map with both hands. He split this frontage off. I hauled the survey cruise stakes for him myself. One fall. Never gave it another thought in 7 years. There was a note folded against the deed. Thad, I split this piece off from the rest and put it in your name at the courthouse. A long time ago. The barn and the land down to the road is yours, and has been for years. It is not part of anything anybody else can sell. If a day comes when somebody tells you different, you take this paper to a lawyer, and you stand your ground. Thad read it 3 times, and then looked at the date on the deed. And his hands went cold. 7 years. The year I turned 12. The same year he put the padlock on. The same year he drew the first bed. The same year the school sent the letter home. He got that letter, and he went to the courthouse, and he cut a piece of the earth off and put my name on it. Under the deed was a thick envelope. Savings bonds. Dozens. Bought a few at a time over a long stretch of years. The oldest one dated the year Thad was born. Maribel counted them twice with her glasses on and wrote a figure on the back of the auction receipt and held it up. A little over $40,000. And at the very bottom of the bundle, wrapped in its own cloth, a board of oak. About the length of a man's arm, carved deep and clean and sanded smooth, painted in by hand. Vance and Son. Thad ran his thumb down into the grooves, where the chisel had gone, and stood in a gravel parking lot in November, with 6 women watching him, and did not manage to hold it together this time. And not one of them looked away. And not one of them said a word. And Delphine Aubuchon put her hand flat on his back and left it there. Prosper Halstead met them at the diner that afternoon. Glasses on, glasses off, and when he set the deed down, his hands were not quite steady. "This is recorded," he said. "Filed at the county. 7 years ago. All proper." He tapped it. "Son, this parcel, the barn and the frontage, has never been part of your father's estate." He looked up. "It was already yours before he died." "Then she can't sell," Alvin said. "Not the part that matters." Halstead was already reaching for his phone. "There is no closing. There cannot be a closing. That buyer needs the road frontage, and the road frontage is not hers to convey." Then he stopped, and frowned at the deed, and pulled it back toward himself. "Hold on. What? There's a lien release attached to this. Filed the same week." He put the glasses back on. "Why would there be a—" He read, and went very quiet. "Mr. Halstead. Give me a minute, son. Mr. Halstead." The lawyer took his glasses off, set them on the table, and looked at Thad Vance across a diner booth. "Your father's second mortgage," he said. "The one your stepmother didn't know about. What about it?" "He didn't take it because he was failing." Halstead turned the deed around. "The bank held a note on that road frontage from before your father owned the house. Came up for sale 7 years ago. Somebody was going to buy it out from under him." He tapped the page. "So he borrowed against his own roof, and bought it, and deeded it to a 12-year-old boy the same month. Nobody in that booth said anything." "There's more," Halstead said. "The mortgage was for 62. The parcel cost 41. What happened to the other 21,000? The lawyer looked at his hands. 3 payments, over 4 years, to the regional hospital. For who? Not for him. Halstead shook his head slowly. He wasn't sick then. These are 3 other people's balances, paid in full by a third party. Maribel Kersey put both hands flat on the table. 3 families, she said. 3 families. He mortgaged the house he lived in with her. The house she's about to lose. He mortgaged it to buy me a piece of ground and pay off 3 strangers' hospital bills. And he never told her. He never told her, and she found the debt at his funeral, and she thought, oh God, she thought he gambled it, or drank it, or lost it. She's been living for 3 weeks thinking her husband threw their house away. Thad stood up. "Where are you going?" Alvin said. "Home." The whole yard was there when he came down the slope, because word does not stay quiet in a town that size. The hauler's rig, the clean white pickup, Rowena's car, and behind them, drifting down from the road, Wendell Poteet's truck, Delphine's station wagon, Maribel's little sedan, Josiah standing off to one side with his hands in his pockets, and the developer out of his truck already, checking his watch. Corbin Slade, 2 counties over. "Do we have a problem here or not?" Slade said. "I need this cleared, and the frontage parcel free of structures by Friday." That was the deal. Halstead stepped forward with the survey in his hand. "There's a problem," he said. "Not the one you think. The frontage parcel is not the seller's to convey." He held it up. "It was deeded to this young man 7 years ago and recorded at the county. The barn sits on it. The road access sits on it." He let it settle. "Your deal needs this ground, and this ground is his." Slade looked at that paper for a long, silent moment, and Rowena Vance sat down, right there, on the cold edge of the barn side step. Slow, like her legs had simply resigned, because the closing was Friday, and the closing was the entire plan, and the closing had just died in a frozen yard in front of 19 people. Then Slade turned around, and found his smile, and it was a good smile, expensive. "Son," he said. "This actually works out cleaner for me." He came forward with his hand out. "I'll deal with you direct. That 1 acre with the road on it is all I ever needed." And then he named a number. It had more zeros in it than anything Thad Vance had ever been offered in his life. Enough to walk off that hill. Enough to never pick up a tool again, never be cold again, never be hungry, never stand in a frozen yard, while somebody carried his mother out of a building in a stranger's truck. Cash. By Friday. Slade shrugged. Friendly. You'd have to be a fool to sit on a dirt barn, when I'm standing right here handing you that. And for one honest second, 1 second, and Thad would never lie to himself about it later, he let himself feel the whole weight of it come down on his shoulders. I could hand a man a signature. Instead of making things slow with my hands for the rest of my life. One signature. That's all it is. It's a piece of paper. It's a piece of paper, and I can't even read it. Then he looked at the barn. At the oak sign leaning against the doorframe, where he'd set it that morning. Vance and Son. Carved 7 years ago. Wrapped in cloth. Put away to wait for a day that man must have known he might not live to see. And the second passed, and it didn't leave a mark on him. I'm not selling my father's land, Thad said. Came out quiet. It didn't need to be anything else. Go on home. Slade stared at him, then shook his head like Thad was the one who'd lost his mind. Got in the white truck, drove up the hill. The hauler tore his contract in half, dropped the pieces in the frozen mud, and went after him. And then it was just the people who had known Everett Vance, standing in a cold yard around a woman who had run clean out of road. Thad walked over and stood in front of her. Rowena looked up, and her face wasn't hard anymore. It was frightened and tired and old. I'm going to lose the house, she said, flat. No fight in it. He took a second mortgage I never knew about, and the bills from the end. That sale was everything. She pressed a hand over her mouth, took it away. I know what I did to you. I do know that. She made herself look at him. I was scared and I was cruel. And I told myself you'd land fine, because you always took everything so quiet. Her voice went. That's no excuse. I know it isn't. I never hated you. Lower now. Whatever else isn't true, that is. She looked down the long room at all his father's finished work standing under the open doors. I hated that he loved this barn more than he ever loved being in that house with us. Her hands closed on her own coat. And I couldn't fight it. And I never once understood it. She made a small broken sound. I understand it now. God help me. I understand the whole of it now, that it's too late to ever tell him so. Josiah came down and stood next to Thad, openly, on Thad's side of the yard, and his mother saw it, and her face came apart. Thad was quiet a long moment. $11, a duffel bag and a deaf dog and a yard hard with frost. She called me and this barn the same thing with the same mouth. She was wrong about the barn. So I figure she was wrong about me too. He crouched down. So he was looking up at her instead of down. The way his father had once crouched in front of a high stool. How much is the mortgage? He said. The one he took. Rowena blinked. A little under 40,000. Why? Thad looked over at Maribel, who had the bond's figure in her head. And Maribel gave him the smallest nod in the world. You can keep the house. Rowena Vance stared at him. What? He'd have wanted somebody warm in it. Through the winter. Thad stood up. And he didn't take that money for himself. Halstead can show you where every dollar went. You should see it. Thad. So I'll pay off what he borrowed. The house is yours. Free of it. You don't owe me a thing. Her voice broke in half. I put you out in the cold. I know. He looked back at the barn, at the long room, at his father's work, and the beginnings of his own. I'm not doing it for you. A beat. I'd rather be his son than be even with you. Nobody said anything. Maribel had her hand pressed to her chest. Alvin was looking hard at the treeline. Delphine Aubuchon was crying, without any expression on her face at all, which is a thing only women of a certain age know how to do. And then Delphine planted her cane. Well, she said, somebody get the ladder. They hung the sign that afternoon. Alvin held the ladder. Josiah carried the drill. Thad set the board level and true above the wide doors, where every soul coming down that drive would see it. Vance and Son. He came down and stood back in the failing light, and looked up at his father's carving hanging over the open doors, and wiped his face with the back of his hand, and picked up his tools and went back inside to work. By the time the frost let go of that valley, the barn was alive again. You could hear it from the county road. The high clean whine of a planer, the knock of a mallet, an old dog's single bark at something in the grass. The wide doors stood open most days now, and folks who'd driven that road their whole lives slowed down to read the sign. Because for the first time the barn had a name on the outside that matched what had always been on the inside. Maribel kept the books, twice a week, glasses down, pen moving. And one evening she stopped writing and said, without looking up, "I watched her do it to you, for 7 years." Thad's hands slowed on the board. "I saw how she talked to you at the market. I saw you eating alone at my counter at 8 o'clock at night when you were 15 years old. She capped the pen, and I said nothing, because it wasn't mine, because your daddy never asked me to. She squared the ledger. That was cowardice, and I'd like it said out loud once." Thad thought about it a while. "You're here now." "That is not the same thing." "No, ma'am." He set the board down. "But it's the part one can use." Alvin came most mornings, too old for the heavy work and honest about it, sitting by the stove sorting lumber, telling Thad which boards were hiding a split down the middle. And one morning in March he said his own piece. "I told your daddy you weren't built for much." Thad's hands stopped. "When the school sent that letter, he came into my yard white as a sheet, and I said some of 'em just aren't built for much, Everett. Best make peace with it early." The old man turned his cap over. "He never brought you back to the lumber yard after that." 9 years. I worked out why about 4 years too late." He looked at the floor. "So when I said don't talk to me about paying, that's part of what I meant. And you ought to know it. I'd rather you know it than think better of me than I've got coming." Thad was quiet a while. Then he picked the board back up. "Which end's the split on?" "Left." "Then hand me the other one." And Alvin Threadgill went back to sorting lumber, and did not trust his own face for about 10 minutes. Josiah came after school every day the weather allowed. He had an apron on the wall now, next to Everett's old one, and his hands were getting surer by the week. And the dovetailed box he'd built at 12 years old sat on the bench, where he could see it. "You're going to be good at this. I'm nowhere near you. You weren't supposed to be. I had a head start that began when I was 6. Thad nudged the boy's elbow square to the work. "Keep your hands on it. The rest sorts itself." Rowena came down to the barn for the first time on a morning in April. Stood at the top of the slope along, while before she came the rest of the way. Thad didn't go up to make it easy. Didn't make it hard either. Just kept working and let her come at her own speed. She'd taken a job at the pharmacy in town. She'd kept the house free and clear since the week the bonds came due. She stopped a few feet inside the doors and held out a cardboard box. These were in the attic. Photographs. Dozens. Your father and your mother. And some of you when you were small. She set the box down like it might break. "I never had any right to them. I should have given them to you a long time ago. There's a quilt in there too. Your mother made it." She stopped. "I don't know why I kept it. Maybe I was—" She stopped again. "Maybe I was angry that he'd loved a whole life before me, and I took it out on the boy that life left behind." Her chin was shaking. "That was the wrongest thing I ever did, and I did it for 7 years." Thad wiped his hands on the apron and looked in the box. On top was a photograph of his father, young, laughing, his arm around a dark-haired woman. The two of them standing in front of the barn back, when it was nothing but a barn. "Thank you," he said. And he meant it. Rowena nodded quick and turned to go. At the door she stopped and looked up at the sign. "He always called it that," she said, "even when there was nothing out here but him." A small, sad smile. "I used to think he was being foolish." She looked at Thad. "He was just being patient." One evening in May, Maribel came out to the barn with the packet of letters. She sat down on a crate by the stove and put her glasses on. "You've had these 5 months. I can't read them. I know that." She untied the bootlace. "That's why I'm here." And Maribel Kersey read Thad Vance, his mother's letters out loud. Every one. Took her most of 2 hours, and she stopped twice to blow her nose, and told him both times it was the sawdust. And near the bottom of the 3rd letter she slowed down, and read one line twice, so he'd have it. "I hope he has your hands. I hope he builds things that last." Thad sat on the shop floor, with his back against his father's bench. She wanted it. Before she ever saw my face, she wanted it. The one thing about myself I never doubted. The one thing, and the whole world spent 19 years telling me it didn't count. Maribel folded the letter along its crease, and handed it over, and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. He finished the cradle in June. Shaped the 2nd rocker with the spokeshave. Slow. Taking his time because some things you don't rush. Sanded it smooth as river stone. Rubbed the oil in by hand. And set it rocking on the floor, slow and even. The exact gentle motion his father had built into it before his heart gave out. There was a young couple out past the mill, expecting in August. The husband laid off when the hours got cut. Thad drove it out and carried it up to the door. The wife kept saying they couldn't pay for something like this. They couldn't possibly. He set it down in their front room and got it rocking. "My father started this cradle," he said. "He didn't get to finish it. I did." He looked at the curve of the slats his father had bent. "There's no charge. There was never going to be one." He straightened up. "He helped half this county and never sent a bill. Somebody's got to keep that going. A beat. So when your little one's grown, and somebody you know needs a hand, you remember where this came from. That's the only payment there is." With some of the money, Thad bought a house. Small. Edge of town. Sagging porch and good bones. Cheap because nobody wanted to do the work it needed. He spent his evenings on it for a month. And when it was tight against the weather, he and Alvin and Josiah carried the loft furniture down out of the barn and set it in piece by piece. The bed with the joined panel headboard. The tall chest of drawers. The writing table. The bookshelf. The deep chair by the front window, where a man could read by the light. Everyone built in secret in the hours after everyone else was asleep. For a day a quiet boy would have somewhere to put them. That night Thad spread his mother's quilt across the bed his father made him, and lay down under the work of 2 pairs of hands that had loved him before he ever knew it. One had hoped he'd have those hands. The other had spent 7 years building a room to put them in. And Thad Vance stayed awake along, while in the dark, and felt, for the first time he could remember, all the way down to the floor of himself, chosen. There was a boy who started hanging around the doors that summer. 12. In trouble at school. The kind of kid the teachers had already made up their minds about. He hung at the edge of the doorway, watching, saying nothing. One day Thad handed him a piece of scrap. "Draw the line of the grain." "I can't. I'm not smart." "Look at the wood. Not at me." The boy looked. "Yeah, I think I see it." "Then you can read the only language that matters in this room." And Thad Vance took the flat carpenter's pencil from behind his own ear and set it behind the boy's. Late that evening he stood in the doorway with a cup of coffee, watching the light go gold over the same yard he'd crossed in the frost, with $11 and a dog who couldn't hear him. Ranger lay by the stove behind him, gray and slow and content. His work long finished, he'd stood at the bottom of that ladder until somebody finally climbed it. Up the slope, the house lights came on, and Thad was glad, in the end, that he hadn't let her lose it. He finished the coffee. Inside, the stove was warm, and the wood smelled like his whole childhood, and there was a joint drying in the clamps that would hold for 100 years. He set the cup down, and went back into his work. And the deaf old dog lifted his head, and the light held over those hills one moment longer, before it let the day go. The E.N.D. Everett Vance was called a man who wasted his life. His son was called slow, Both of them were measured with the wrong ruler by people who never once thought to look for the right one. So if you take one thing from this story, take this. Worthless is only ever the word people use for a thing they never learned how to love. There is a boy somewhere being told what he isn't good at. There is an old man somewhere doing quiet work that nobody will ever send him a thank you note for. Neither one of them is wasting a thing. And kindness given away without a bill, it doesn't disappear. It just waits, sometimes for 30 years. And then it comes back for your children. A note on the message. Yes, the theme is carried inside the script itself, through Everett's hand people's speech, Alvin's line about the only language that matters, Maribel's between the two of us there's a whole person, and Thad's I'd rather be his son than be even with you. The closing block above simply gathers those threads into one short spoken outro so the viewer leaves holding the point.